Fusion Mobile, quality e-learning experience on the go.
Hello, you're welcome to Fusion Mobile e-learning clinic. My name is Tobori Faye and I'll be your literature tutor for today. Now we're going to look at literature in its entirety, the definition, genres or aspects of literature. Then we'll break them down. Each aspect will be broken down and defined, and necessary examples would be given. So now we're going to start. First, what is literature? Now, literature is any written or imaginative work of art that is expressed via poetry, prose, and drama. Now, when we say literature is a written imaginative work of art, it means we are confining it, but it is not so confined. Literature can also be orally transmitted. Now, when you look at the songs, various songs that have been handed over from our forefathers down, you find out that those forms of literature, they are oral. We also have ballads. Then in Africa, we have what we call incantations. There are proverbs, there are riddles, folk tales, and the likes. So now, let us look at the aspects of literature. Now here we have prose, poetry, and drama. Now first, let us look at prose. What is prose? Prose is a written work of art that is mostly written in chapters and paragraphs. Now, as I am speaking to you, I am making use of prosaic language. You find out that I am not making use of verses or stanzas. Now, prose makes use of straightforward narrative. I'll take note of the word narrative. Prose is a narrative in straightforward language without meters and stanzas and any other feature you may find in poetry or drama. Now, prose is broken down into fiction and non-fiction. Okay, so what is fiction? Fiction is simply that aspect of literature that tells a story which is not based on actual events or real events. Now, what are the aspects of fiction? Fiction is further broken down into these: short stories, novels, we have parables, we have fables. Now let us look at some of these aspects. A short story is a small world of the novel. The novel would normally have many characters, but a short story has just a few characters whose actions center around a single event. So what we are saying is that a short story makes use of fewer characters, while novels make use of more characters and is full in length. Now, a novella is a mini novel. It's shorter than a novel. But the short story, among these three, the short story, of course, there's the word short there, so it's the shortest in length. Now, we also have other types of fiction. We have the fable. A fable refers to a story which has animals as characters that are meant to talk and dialogue among themselves. A classical example is George Orwell's Animal Farm, where the characters were mostly animals that were talking among themselves like humans. Now, we also have the romance. A romance in literature, a romance is not just referring to the amorous relationship between a man and a woman. Romance stories actually refer to events, not real events anyway, stories that are out of this world. Okay, the certain characters, incidents, okay, they are out of this world. The characters perform actions that are ordinarily impossible to achieve by humans. Now, a classic example of this is Amos Tutola's The Palm Wine Drinker, where he actually talked about spirits, ghosts, and other mythical creatures. A parable, of course, we are familiar with this. A parable is simply a didactic story. A didactic story tells a moral lesson. Like, and we have stories in the Bible like the Good Samaritan, the parable of the sower, and other examples. Now moving on to non-fiction. As we have said, fiction deals with stories that are not based on actual events, but a non-fictional story will deal with something real, something that you can taste, something that you can feel, something that has actually happened before. Classic examples are, we have autobiography, we have the biography, criticism, journals, diaries, essays. Now, we'll look at them briefly. An autobiography is a life event or an actual story of a person written by the same person, while a biography is a life event that tells the experiences of a person but written by another person. Criticism. A criticism refers to criticism. Now, criticism is also a non-fictional aspect of prose. It is similar to the essay, except that a piece of criticism may evaluate or pass judgment on literary works. Now, when writers have published poems or books, there are some articles that are meant to critique what they have written. Now, criticism falls under that category. Then we also have essays, we have diaries, which are day-to-day recollections. Then we have another aspect of non-fiction is letter, stories that are written in form of a letter. An example is So Long a Letter by Miriam Abba. Then we also have the epistles of Paul in the Bible, Corinthians, Romans, Colossians, Philippians, and so on and so forth. Then we also be looking at the journal. A journal refers to an occasional publication or current research findings or news in a particular area of study. Okay, so having looked at the aspects of fiction and non-fiction, we will now move to a second branch of literature, which is poetry. Now, what is poetry? According to a popular poet, William Blake, he says that poetry is the powerful overflow of emotional feelings and moments collected in tranquility. Now, let us look at another definition. Poetry refers in totality to the deployment of certain devices such as figures of speech. Now, there is no way we can talk about poetry without the use of figures of speech. Now, poetry in its form is quite different from prose because it uses elaborate, elevated language. It's very easy, for instance, it's very easy for you to say, you are beautiful. Now, that's prose language. But in poetry, one may want to describe a beautiful girl as, your eyes twinkle like the sun. That is not an everyday, normal kind of language, which is the effect that poetry tries to make. Now, what are the types of poetry? There are various types of poems. We have the sonnet. A sonnet is a 14-line poem. Now, the 14 lines are divided into the octave and a sestet. Classic examples are the sonnets by William Shakespeare, who wrote about 154 sonnets. A classic example of one of his is, shall I compare thee to a summer's day, thou art more lovely and temperate. Another example of poetry is the narrative. A narrative poem. Another example of a poem is the narrative. A narrative poem tells a story, it tells a tale. Examples are John Milton's Paradise Lost, William Morris's The Proud King. Now, if you look at The Proud King by William Morris, it actually told a Bible story of Nebuchadnezzar, but in poetry form. It's a very long poem of about 119 stanzas. Another example is the epic. Now, the epic and the narrative are similar in the sense that they also tell a story. An epic poem tells a story, but it specifically looks at the heroic events of characters. heroic events. An example is Odysseus, which over time has been reproduced into movies. Now, if you look at the story of Odysseus, he was a fighter, a great warrior who challenged gods. He challenged gods and he went on so many voyages, and he often boasted that he could not die. So now, when you look at the epic, like I said, it tells a story of heroic deeds and actions. Now, there are also several examples of poetry. We have the lyric. A lyric is a short poem in which a speaker expresses some intense personal feeling. A classical example is Song of Sorrow by Kofi Awuno, which is a sad poem. It is short, musical, and rhythmic. Another example of a kind of poem is the ode, O-D-E. An ode is a poem that praises or eulogizes a person. An example is Ode to the Grecian Urn, Ode to Duty by John Keats. Another poem we'll be looking at is the pastoral. A pastoral poem simply describes the life of rural people, simple life, country life, especially of shepherds. An example is The Lake Isle of Innisfree by W.B. Yeats. Okay, so now moving on, we'll be looking at the third branch of literature, which is drama. Drama is simply the imitation of life through actions, imitations. Now, these two words, you cannot remove them from this term, drama. Now, what are the forms of drama? Now, popularly we have tragedy, comedy, tragicomedy, farce. I will be looking at this individually. And what is tragedy? This is a form of drama that is usually regarded as the opposite of comedy, because it is drama that has an atmosphere that is often serious. Now, a tragedy is simply a sad kind of play. Now, it usually has elements that are sorrowful. For example, elements of tragedy include bloodshed, sorrow, struggle, conflict. Oftentimes, the character or the popular characters may have flaws that tend to bring him down, and this would evoke sad feelings from readers or the audience, as the case may be. Examples of classic tragedies are the plays of Shakespeare, for example, Romeo and Juliet, Othello, and so on. Now, looking at comedy as a kind of play, a comedy is simply a play that ends happily, not just happily, but it has very light events. It's a light-hearted play that ridicules or satirizes the follies of characters, which instigates laughter. The events usually lead to a happy ending. Now, as you can see from this definition, comedy is the opposite of tragedy. Now, examples of comedies, plays that you read and make you laugh. For example, we have She Stoops to Conquer by William Shakespeare, The Lion and the Jewel by Wole Soyinka, and Ghana's Kobina Seki's The Blinkards, and other examples. Now, moving on, we'll be looking at tragicomedy. What is a tragicomedy? Tragicomedy is simply a fusion of tragedy and comedy in a play. Now, usually there is a conflict at the beginning. There are problems at the beginning, sad events, but later on, comedy. The play ends on a lighter note. An example of such kind of drama is The Merchant of Venice by William Shakespeare. Now, another category of the drama is farce. Now, farce is a kind of comedy, but an extreme kind of comedy. Usually you find characters who are involved in very absurd events. Now, let's look at a proper definition here. It is characterized by broad visual effects, fast-moving action. Like comedy, it is also light-hearted. It ends on a happy note, but the credibility of events presented in a farce is mostly sacrificed in the process of achieving excess laughter. Now, if you've ever watched clips or video clips by Mr. Bean, Mark Spencer, you would have an idea of what I'm talking about. Now, you find out that the events there are extreme, the actions there are just extreme, and it evokes excess laughter. Alright, so having looked at the three major aspects of literature: prose, poetry, drama, now briefly we will just try to distinguish each aspect. How can you differentiate prose from poetry, prose from drama, poetry from drama, and so on? Now, prose is simply written in chapters, paragraphs. It makes use of straightforward language. And poetry makes use of elaborate and elevated language. It makes use of figures of speech. It is written in stanzas, lines, verses, meters. Now, prose is written in chapters and paragraphs. Poetry, lines, stanzas. Drama is written in acts and scenes. Prose is meant to be read. Poetry is best appreciated when it is recited. Drama, of course, is best appreciated when it is acted on stage. Alright, so about now, some questions will be displayed on your screen so as to determine how much you have learned so far.